And we're live. I'll make a quick intro in Portuguese, then I'll switch to English, ok? Olá pessoal, bem-vindos ao nosso Papo de Mercado. Hoje a gente tem a Alessandra Sollberger, uma figura fantástica. Vocês vão conhecer um pouco mais da história dela aqui hoje e os diversos projetos que ela toca. Eu vou, como a gente sempre faz com os nossos convidados internacionais, eu vou mudar agora para o inglês. Hi Alessandra, thank you so much for joining us today here at Papo de Mercado, our webinar series. And please, I'd like to start with you sharing a little bit of your story, which is an amazing story.
Of course. Hi, Gabriel. Great to be here. My story. So I'm actually Swiss Brazilian, and I do understand Portuguese, but I never speak it. So it's good practice for me. But I was born in Switzerland. I grew up there, and I've been entrepreneurial since being a little kid. So really started out like selling my books and toys, like doing it for my school. And then I left Switzerland in my studies. I actually moved to England. I went studying at Oxford, and I got much more into technology entrepreneurship, right? So I learned much more about software. And I also learned about, bigger topics like governance. And so governance is one of the reasons why I've been in the blockchain technology space for 8 years now. And I think that it's all just getting started at this point. But yeah, so I kind of went from this entrepreneurial drive more into finance. I worked at funds in private equity. I worked at Blackstone after my studies. Then I worked in venture capital. And then since leaving venture capital, I started having my own companies. And so right now I have two activities. So on one side, there is Up to Impact, which is a global community of impact investors, impact entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders. So it's all about sustainability. It's all about climate technologies, areas like agricultural tech, sustainable foods, renewable energy. And so we have, a lot of activities going on in there. Obviously, there is a lot that is happening in the sector overall in all countries around the world. And then on the other side, I've been putting together a book in the blockchain space. So this is a little bit about my background and what I'm doing.
Fantastic. So lots of stuff to talk about. First thing I'd like to ask you about is impact investing. I know that's a big thing for you. How do you see impact investing today? How mainstream it is, and what are the main challenges that any impact investors and impact companies face today?
Yeah. So the thing with impact investing is that it is just going mainstream as we speak. It's growing a lot. People's awareness is growing as well. Like people want to, be part of the solution and not the problem. And people want to move towards the future and not stay in the past, which is all really great. The one thing that is important, though, as a challenge is that it needs to be done right. Impact investing needs to come with clear metrics. It is profitable investing because, these are the business models of the future, right? Like these are things we need to solve, like we need to do in a certain way. It's not just like, to be nice, right? And so it's important to kind of distinguish and make sure that's understood. Also make sure that, fake impact, you could call it, is not done either, because impact has to be, accountable, measurable, right? So greenwashing and, investing in ESG stocks that are not really ESG, like doesn't go far enough. And so I think it's very important at this point in the market that companies and platforms such as ourselves, like make sure that there is number one, education on how to do this right. And number two, there is an accountability circle, right, of being able to say who is doing impact without BS and who is doing impact with BS.
And I know that's a big issue because you get what you track. So what do you see in terms of advancement relating to accountability and metrics for ESGs?
So advancements are, interestingly, that we have now ended up having an ecosystem of hundreds of metrics, right? Hundreds of metrics, frameworks, approaches. Now there's also accounting firm, like on my newsletter of Top to Impact, we covered last week the fact that now there are, good morning, Victor. Hi. We covered the fact that there are even accounting firms, like I was saying, coming up with all of these frameworks. And the problem becomes that, a new entrant in the space gets confused by that, right? I see that all the time. And even myself, when I started approaching the space, I was like, how do I, what metrics make sense, what don't, right? So there needs to be much more of a collective and collaborative effort towards creating that, as opposed to everybody saying like, we have the right way, this is how you do it. And, everybody trying to go down in silos, because I think, this new paradigm of impact has got to be more about collaboration and less about competition, and more about transparency, less about, opaqueness. And so as part of that, we are really looking at kind of like helping the entire ecosystem, also coming up with common languages and common ways to work together with metrics.
So in our firm and in our audience, we work with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs as well as later stage. But for those guys that are beginning their companies right now, what do they have to do to, have a shot with impact investors? And is it something, and I know your answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway, is it something that every startup needs to look into, like part of the basic work that you have to do?
Yeah, good question. So I would say yes and no. Mostly yes, but from my perspective, it's a couple of things. So in terms of what to do is being able to prove how you track things and how you make things concrete, right? And being able to kind of like show that it's more than just like a, quite frankly, I can sense that right away. It's just like a shiny extra edition of like, oh, by the way, it's like really good for that. Like, okay. And so that's one thing, because the ecosystem maturing, I see this also with the providers of capital to funds. So the family offices and the institutional investors who put money into impact funds want to see a real metrics, want to see a real reporting. So this trickles down to startups, right? And then the second thing is, it's more kind of like a fundamental question of, does everybody need to have it? To the extent that you're not doing something harmful, or again, being in the past rather than in the future, then yes, right? Everybody has to be mindful of that.
Awesome. And what's the role of technology in terms of better impact, and how do they connect?
Yeah, it's absolutely key. And I come from a technology background, and my investments that I do in impact investing, like I just made an investment in an alternative protein company. They are tech investments as well, right? That company, for instance, it's biotech, it's e-commerce, it's a few things that are, in tech, so to say, right? In different areas of that. So it's key in the sense that it can enable us to get there better and faster, right? The right technologies can really enable us to get the job done in a manner that is either scalable to the masses or cost efficient enough to make sense, right? And so really it's a very broad question, right? Because we could go down so many tangents, but I kind of think about the impact space very much from a technology perspective anyway.
And which would be the key technologies you'd see, in your opinion, and in the space?
Yes. So the way I think about impact and sustainability, frankly, I think about it as a new paradigm for all our economic sectors and industries and all geographies, right? And so this means that I don't necessarily think, oh, it's this specific area of ag tech, or it's this specific area of energy. For me, it's like the energy industry is becoming sustainable, the agriculture industry is becoming sustainable. It's like, right? So it's that kind of shift. And so the way that I think about it depends on the area. And for example, in energy, you see linear and non-linear forms of sustainable approaches. And so what I mean by that is that there are things like fusion and hydrogen that, if we get right, both from a public understanding, right, and perception, and obviously from a technology perspective, if we get them right, then it's non-linear. In other words, we go from zero to hero. We go to being very sustainable all of a sudden. Obviously, solar, wind are great, but I think that number one, it's very important to be honest about how they're done, because if you need to put a solar farm where there was a forest before, that's not cool. If you need to build wind turbines in ways that consume even more resources than the resources that these wind turbines are going to spare, that's also not cool either. It makes no sense. It's very marginal, right? And so you're stuck in the same dynamic of just wanting to advance your own cause without looking at the broader picture. And again, I think there starts to be much more education about that. So it really depends on the sector that we look at. But overall, it's I think it's a function of efficiency. Technology is a function of efficiency.
And in the line of efficiency, how much profit are investors willing to forego, if any, or is it a question of building smart rather than letting go of profits?
The reality is that impact is superiorly profitable than traditional investing. If you look at all the data that we have in the markets in the past 5 years of ESG investing versus normal investing, it's now a fact with a lot of data across different markets that ESG investing has a superior performance. Why? Again, this gets us back to the kind of the question of like, these themes are not nice to do. They're part of the future. Like, they're some of the biggest investment opportunities of this decade and beyond, right? Well, that's number one. Number two, if it comes just to ESG practices, a company that is managed in line with ESG is a sound company with a better culture and so on. So that's it, right? Then I think let's cover another side of these questions, because in private markets is a bit different, right? So in private markets, when you look at the traditional venture capital industry, the dynamics there are that there's a 5 to 10 years max investment horizon, right? And ideally, there's an exit within 3 to 5 years. So typically, these exits are like the company gets bought by someone else. But if you're building like sustainable long-term companies, obviously you have a different time horizon. And so the picture needs to be reconciled in there. And often it also means that you're foregoing like a hockey stick type of growth, right? To do things in a different way. So it really depends on the markets. But when it comes to public markets, that really is no longer a statement that can be made.
And are you seeing new kinds of VC funds with other time horizons that consider this kind of framework?
So again, yes and no. So unfortunately, the providers of most of the LP capital for funds still have a normal framework, and that's some work that they are also putting into figuring out how they can change that, right? And we interact a lot with them, so that's something that is in the making. And then I would say like it's starting to change, and I think we will see. Thank you, Startup Huddle, Rio de Janeiro. And so we will see a lot of kind of changes and statements and opinions being put out there, right, on how to make this possible, and in what ways we can all transition towards longer time frames.
I understand. And do you think Bitcoin, or rather blockchain, solves that? In terms of, and by that I mean talking about funding mechanisms and also governance, which is a theme that you like.
Yes. So there are a lot of things to cover in that. So number one, blockchain technology per se is really about innovating on the systems that run our politics, our societies, our businesses. And then the new type of business models, so to say, business models 2.0, that are going to emerge through blockchain technology, because they have decentralized dynamics or hybrid dynamics. So in other words, some things are centralized top down, other things are bottom up, and you need to think about things in such a different way. So I'll kind of like dive into this more concretely. So in 2017, like there was an ICO bubble. Everybody's like, token for this, token for that. Let's tokenize the world. And most of that stuff was nonsense. Like I'm the first person who goes on panels and says like all of these tokens should not exist because they're useless. So the reason though is when you have such a new way to build companies and build value, what happens is that rather than thinking in the new paradigm, people just can't help retrofitting in the old school paradigm. So a normal business model where it's like, okay, there's the marketing department, the tech department, and so on. You typically don't need a token. Why do you need a token? You need a token because you need to build an economy of different stakeholders. And the way that you think about your business model is actually you're building an economy. So you're thinking about all these different stakeholders, players, right? That all have different motives and can provide value in a certain way and want to extract value in a certain way. And so you need to regulate their dynamics and their interactions, right? And that is what your token helps you doing because it incentivizes people to behave in a certain way and it disincentivizes them from behaving in another way, right? And then also the other thing about the token there is that because you're creating an economy, you want participants in that economy to be able to capture over time the increase in the size of that economy that they are contributing to. You're not going to do that with the US dollar because the US dollar is going to go down the drain. It already is, right? So along with many other currencies in the times we live in, which is why it's great to have something that is inflation resistant like Bitcoin. But anyway, I'll stop the advertisement.
Did you see the exchange rate of the real?
No.
It just, if you're making a case in point, just use the real. I
Okay.
mean, it's
Okay.
terrible.
It tends to be the case. Yeah, okay.
So
Well,
please, sorry.
yeah. So, but anyhow, so there you go. Like Bitcoin, like the thing also with when you build these economies and you build these currencies is that like even if you build like your currency now, for instance, I am launching with my blockchain book coming out, I am launching a global community that is decentralized, that has a token and a value to it. The community is all about taking this education to the next step, right? So we're going to feature all these people, from the crypto bubble, from the blockchain economy, because in the book we have the main figures, the main leaders in the space, right? But what we're going to put in our community is really like touch points, right? And interviews, like this one that, we're having in a way, but like to make sure that people can start really taking home what they learned in the book. But what we want to do in there as well is having, a token that captures the value of the growth, right? And therefore the value that all these stakeholders are providing to it, right? So this is where it's needed. But it's such a different way of thinking. It's very different from a standard business model. It's more like a community, right? It's more like, oh, there's like this different, like, right? So this is also why we're seeing a lot of cases where it feels like a scam, and it usually is a scam, right? And it makes no sense because it's tough for people to think about it from this first principle. Another reason why the education is so important still, right? So this is one thing I wanted to say. And then just like, back to your question of like, how does blockchain technology help? So right now, with our centralized structures and the inherent corruption that is with human nature, because if something is manipulable, sooner or later, someone will want to find a way to manipulate around it. So the thing that blockchain technology does is that it removes that from the equation. So in other words, because it's distributed and because there is no longer a single point of failure in a human or some humans, right, that can be like, let's extract most of the value for ourselves. Why wouldn't we do it, right? Instead of having that, you remove that option, right? And so people who would by nature then end up thinking like, how are we going to optimize it for ourselves? They can no longer do that. They can only contribute to collective value. So not only it removes all these dynamics, right? Like driven by like ego and so on, but it also is a more efficient option because maximizing for collective value is always more efficient. And that's how nature works, by the way. That's how DNA works. Our DNA is distributed. Like, if I scratch here, like I can have a copy. This is nothing new, right, to the way how this planet works. and how nature has evolved over millions of years. But the problem is that the way we've created and developed our systems, justice, like corporations and trust, has been very basic so far. So we need to do better.
Yeah, totally agree. When you look at blockchain, it's not only about the technology but community building. So you have to mix them both, and it's pretty much the logic of open source. But then there's a challenge that I think there are 50 million Bitcoin wallets in the world right now, and if you compare it to Facebook, for instance, with 2 billion people, 2 billion accounts, it's like a drop in an ocean. Mm-hmm. So even though we make a lot of noise and buzz, we're still a very small community in the blockchain space, and then it's for me. I've watched the dawn of the public commercial internet. I remember that. I'm that old. So
I was about to make a joke about that. Yeah.
So I do remember the modems and you having to dial up and be in the late hours so you could get lower telco fees and all that.
Yeah.
So I was there, and and in the beginning the internet people were pretty much like blockchain people today. We thought that the world was an oyster and everyone would jump in, and the free flow of information would make it impossible to centralize because internet routing and data packets are essentially decentralized. And once that scaled, especially through mobile phones and gateway companies like Facebook, Google, and etc., we're seeing the kinds of bubbles that connect, that make the space more harmful than useful, in the sense of distributing information and building that pool of common knowledge and a wider community building. So there's a big question of design there, I think, of how do you design those decentralized networks, and how do you build those business models, and what do you see is happening on that particular front, and not only in terms of business models but also on solving democracy.
Nice. So just to make sure that I also understand, like, your comparison of saying we could have structured the internet community so much better, but somehow it started going into a compromised direction, and then that's just how things go from there. And you're saying, how can we avoid that and do better here? How do we go about structuring things better? Yeah?
Yeah, I think that in the middle of the way there was a design flaw. I think the internet began with the design and with a specific kind of governance and regulation that enabled and forced it to be decentralized. And along the way, we let it go, and it suddenly became, just 5 companies and 3 telco companies in each country ruling what we can see and what we can do.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the fundamental difference here, and let's have it as a debate. If you can play devil's advocate, that would be great. But I think the fundamental difference in here is that it's almost like, if you think about AWS and the fact that suddenly everybody can easily access storage space without having to go physically, like find centers and all of that, in the same way, everybody can build decentralized protocols, because that's the whole point of this wave of infrastructure right now, is to create the platforms upon which all these internets can be built, right? So it's no longer like, in a way, a centralized effort that requires a lot of resources to build a decentralized thing. But in a way, it's like saying, okay, now we have ways and processes to make sure that we build it as a platform, and then everybody can build on top of that. And so what happens in there, like, even if we want to compare it to the internet, let's say that back then this would have been possible, then there would have been, let's say, 10 different internets developed, and then it's up to the users to, the market, to choose the best one. So if they feel like one of them is like owned by a couple of telcos, like they're not going to be as excited as the one that is truly decentralized and giving them value as well, by the way, because it incentivizes them to be part of it. It says like, we're all sharing this pie. So I think fundamentally this is the difference. And by the way, this is in the longer term. I think that this space is going to create so much healthy, how can I say, it's going to refine a lot, like the approaches that come out based on what delivers that distributed value, because everybody can do it better otherwise. And guess what? If like users can get more equal distributed value elsewhere, they're going to prefer that, right? So that's how I would see the difference.
Interesting. So in that sense, do you see it, the blockchain space as an ecosystem of many blockchains, or will it eventually lead to one chain to rule them all?
Yeah, I do see it as an ecosystem in the longer run, and I do see it as it will get increasingly straightforward and cheap and natural to create better alternatives. Nonetheless, not the least, because it's open source. Okay. So what does it mean that it's open source? Like you guys might have heard about forks, right? So, forks are, you create like the carbon copy of this protocol and you say, now we're continuing with it, but we believe in a couple of different ways to do this, right? So we're going to change these ways. And then people are going to be able to say, yeah, nice, right? Obviously, there is like, let's not just look at it starry-eyed, because obviously there are those dynamics. I mean, look at Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin is kind of that for currencies, right? But I very much see Bitcoin in a way, it's taken this role of a tracker for the entire space. And we're so early on, that it's like, I already see specifically in like people in crypto, actually, some of that, they all have their favorite currencies already. Right. So that's very encouraging, right? They're like, well, I don't agree with Bitcoin because of this and that. I use Monero, it's more privacy friendly. Or, oh, I'm just an Ethereum person. Don't get me started, right? Like, so I see a lot of that right now already.
And very heated debates about that as well, and communities they're really strong.
Yeah.
So almost like political parties sometimes. But in a healthier way sometimes, and sometimes not. But talk. You told us about your book and community project in the blockchain space. It's Blockchain Mavericks, and what were what are the highlights of that project that you have so far, and when will we be able to actually see it?
Yes. So the book Blockchain Mavericks really is a collection of inspiring interviews with the main global leaders in the space. So, the people who run Bitcoin.com, blockchain.com, like all the protocols, like, but the difference is that for me, when I decided to do the book, I was like, why are they never talking about the longer term stuff, the way that this is going to go mainstream, the way that it's going to impact specific industries? Why is it still just about, crypto prices and stuff like that? Because when I entered the space back in 2012, 8 years ago, it was very idealistic, and I know where you're asking me that question about like, oh, these different protocols fighting like political parties, because I had a bit that impression, in like a few years ago when things started to, become diversified. But anyhow, I was like, why are we not talking about this? Because, good morning, Julia, because we are just not finding that anywhere. And I know that they care about these bigger topics. I know because half of the people in the book were already friends of mine, having been in the space for a long time. So I was really like, this needs to be covered. I think this is the kind of narrative that smart people in other industries who are not in this industry specifically yet want to hear and understand, right? To get on board with this. So that's the idea behind the book. And it's really packed with a lot of like big stuff and statements and examples, you know. It's coming out in December. It's coming out this winter. Um, and in terms of the community more specifically, already as I was putting together the book, you know, a few friends of mine who didn't make the cut for the book were like, well, what about, you know, maybe on your website and interviews and this and that? And I was like, yeah, for sure. But then I realized, you know, with building Top Tier Impact, so Top Tier Impact, just to clarify, is my other company that is the global community of impact and sustainability investors, right? And so with Top Tier Impact, I've learned a lot of things about community building and evolved what I knew already before into something new. But I realized that my main reason with this book and the reason that I put it together has really been about I want to kind of help with the education to move to the next stage. Because like you were saying before, there's only 15 million wallets. We're still talking about very small numbers, but I find it exciting at the same time. You know, I think that like, yeah, we are in those early days. There's so much to do, right? So I want a hub that brings together people who already understand crypto and are in crypto with people who aren't yet, because what I am seeing by being into different words is that they don't understand each other. You know, my friends in crypto are like, they literally think like most of them, they're like, yeah, everything is like so well developed now and it's ready for the mainstream. And I'm like, this is nowhere near being ready for the mainstream. I find it annoying to use. You know, I find it super annoying to use. In fact, like I really don't like where we're at. You know, this should be much easier. So anyway.
Oh, come on. It's really easy. All I have to do is download MetaMask and run it through Brave and then reinstall it in your computer like 5 times because it crashes. And it's really easy.
Yeah. And then I tell, you know, like I was having a chat with a friend of mine who's a big investor in the blockchain space a few weeks ago. And I was telling it because he was like, yeah, I'm sure that, you know, if you were to add token dynamics to Top Tier Impact, like it would be fine because it's so easy to use. And I remember his face when I said, look, like 90% of people in there have never heard of MetaMask, and they would probably find it a very dodgy word, you know, MetaMask. Like, what does MetaMask have? And he couldn't believe me, you know, he was like that. So that is the barrier, right? And I think we need these two words to communicate much more, because then education is going to flow faster. Understanding of the users is going to flow faster as well. I mean, even on Coinbase, you go on Coinbase and there's no like buy button directly. It's like exchange and do this and do that. And like I've heard people, like I've heard users like going through that and saying this is very confusing, right? So I think there needs to be much more of that understanding in place.
Fantastic. And that's what Blockchain Mavericks is going to be about. The community,
Yes.
not the book. And we'll have the book on December. That's great. That's fantastic. So we have a question by Fabio here. Great to hear you here. I would like to know if Top Tier Impact has initiatives or connections in Brazil or South America. If so, could you share a case? Thank you so much and congrats.
Yes, Fabio, thank you for the question. In fact, definitely we do. We have various members of Top Tier Impact in Brazil. One of them has your same name, Fabio. His name is Fabio Alperovich, and he runs an ESG investment fund that has been one of the first ESG investment funds in Brazil. It does really well. He's also on the board of WWF Brazil. And we have various other cool members. You know, one of them we were just interviewing this week, and she's joining now. She's at a company called Vinci Partners, and Vinci now is doing impact investing as well through her. So yeah, we do have an active community in Brazil too.
Awesome. So in Top Tier, you if you want to join the newsletter, all you have to do, I know I'm there. All I have to do is go to the website and sign up for this. But how does the dynamic work, and how did you build the community there?
Yeah. So we are a very active, engaged community, and our members can communicate and do business with each other, no matter where they're based in the world. And the reason is because when I started TTI, I didn't start it to say, oh, we'll be a network. I started it to say, we will accelerate the growth of this space in a healthy way, right? And so because of that, it became just natural to make sure that leaders in impact and sustainability get connected better to each other so that they can do their business better, right? And that's also why we structured ourselves in a way where there's a lot of communication, right? So we have our regional groups on WhatsApp around the world. Then we have our groups by sector on Slack, like our agriculture and foods group, our healthcare group, our energy group. And, they're like mini top tier impacts, like they have their global calls, their events, their discussions. So it's really, really structured in a way that allows for a lot of touch points among members, no matter where they're based. And obviously, within similar sectors or similar topics, right? So it's pools. Um, and the way that we've been growing, I mean, on the website, you can see, like, you can also apply for membership. But really, like, another important thing is our membership is based on the individual and not on the company. And I realized at some point, because again, I started this just like out of a specific need. I didn't go and compare, oh, there's this network or that network. In fact, I support them if we can, and we have partnerships. We have official partnerships with the World Economic Forum and now with the United Nations. And so we are really kind of, collaborative, because we need to walk the talk, right? If this space is to be collaborative. And so the reason why it's based on the individual is because there's people behind companies, and we care about the people and their values as well, not just of what the company is doing, right? So I think this is also why there's so much engagement and activity.
That's fantastic. Is that also because you build a very successful community in top tier impact, but also you do have a huge following on LinkedIn and Instagram. So you're also a community builder from, I mean, for the everyday job for all of us. So how do you do that? Which is it the same thing? Do you wear different hats for doing one and the other?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You're making me reflect on that. It's great. I would say yes and no. So yes, to the extent, I like this answer on these questions, but then I'll tell you exactly why, right? So like yes, because um, within top tier impact, we go into super specific like debates and things and all of that, right? So that's not necessarily something that I'm gonna put out like in an Instagram story, right? But the reason, the no behind wearing the same hat is that ultimately it's always like me at my core and my values, right? I talk about what I care about. I talk, also on Instagram, I talk about impact and blockchain to my followers. Obviously, again, I'm not going to go into like a super specific explanation about fusion energy, but it's really about that, right? And it's really about engaging around that. And I think ultimately, the way that I would see it, is like on a scale from 0 to 10 in terms of the things that I like to talk about and my interests, like I'm just giving a more mainstream version, I guess, that can meet people where they're at better when I'm in that sort of broadcasting function versus when I'm in a more specific dynamic and I'm going really deep in a certain topic.
Amazing. And Alessandra, you are a voice, an effective voice in the tech community and investing community. And I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How is it being a woman, and how open are those communities to diversity right now? The technology, blockchain, and investing communities.
Yeah, good question. So obviously right now diversity is a big topic, but I think I will step back and almost go a bit more philosophical. Like the reality is that our word, our like company structures, company cultures, processes, they've been built in a very masculine way, and so have those words. And I have to say, so it's like sort of like structure and this and competitive and like this and that. Whereas the more like the feminine values, like more around collaboration and all of that. And so these words, like even though diversity by now is a big topic, they can be intimidating and rub off the wrong way. For me, I have a lot of like that side as well. And so my career, I've mostly been in male environments, and you could say like I have thicker skin, but really I just don't really notice, but like I know for a fact that it's just not designed to be balanced out in that way, and I think that the world that we're in needs more than ever these feminine values as well embedded in our structures and in our processes, to to make things more sustainable, more enjoyable, whatever you want to call it, more, again, more efficient from a collective perspective, which by the way for me is a function of evolution as well, because it's been proven in theory of evolution we evolve as entire ecosystem in balance. We don't evolve as a single species. So what does this tell you? It tells you that if you were to go, let's say, in the savannah and give technology and weapons to lions, they'd be like, great, let's catch all the gazelles, and then they would kill themselves, right? Because they would starve. But the problem is that right now as humans, we've gotten the technology, we've gotten to the weapons, but we've been playing this ecosystem game on a global level, right? And so it's much tougher to get a feedback loop, like from the savannah having no gazelles anymore, right? And therefore having lions starving and a bunch of other things happening. And so, but we're starting to notice it, right? So, to get back to your question, even though diversity is a very big topic, the reality is that this is a much more deeply rooted issue, and it's embedded in how our society operates currently.
And do you see a systems change that's actually becoming more effective in solving that?
Yeah, and I think in system theory, like you can also see how chaos plays a big role. And often, it's like chaos the driving force, because otherwise, like things proceed by inertia in the same way. And the reality is that we're hitting a point that I think things are going to get much more chaotic than they are today, much, much more before they get better. That's the reality. And if you zoom out, and like that's not fun to think about, but if you zoom out and you think about like the bigger process that is at play, is because the change that needs to happen is massive and it's at fundamental levels. And so it requires a lot of chaos as well to be needed and implemented.
So, in other words, we're in a tipping point at society, and we're living through the turmoil of all the changes that's happening right now. And talking about that, how do you see the pandemic playing out in this whole ecosystem?
Yeah, so it's easy to say, yeah, like these pandemics, like because we've been misbehaving or whatever. I think in reality, I think what it's doing is just bringing to surface the underlying kind of like dysfunctional dynamics, whether it's our economy, right, that has been quite frankly on a what's name, like on a lifeline for a while already, with all the dynamics that a central bank or like printing money and whatever, like it's just exposing hard, and then also social unrest. Social unrest is not like the pandemic, just like, oh, we have to be home, but like there's such like if you look at the US, right, and everything that's happening, the wealth inequalities have been growing so much in the past decades. No kidding. And so And then on top of it, we now have internet, social media, and like it's just all making it more clear. And so, this is not new stuff. This is stuff that has been there anyway. It's been boiling there anyway. And this pandemic is just like accelerating the pace at which it's coming out.
Yeah, totally agree. On that line, which would be your favorite dystopia to live?
My favorite what, sorry?
Dystopia, like, would you rather would you rather be in a do you think we're walking towards a Mad Max world, or like a Brave New World, or is it none of them, and we're actually going through an utopia, Star Trek like, or something? Drawing
Right.
on sci-fi things.
Yeah. So, well, it's funny because, if you read my newsletters, the top tier impact newsletters, I like to use the metaphor dystopia or utopia, right? Or rather, I talk about, okay, so Steve said, we've got two directions. I'm
That's
a
why I asked it.
yeah. I thought so. You've been reading your newsletters. That's good. So the reality is that, so I'm a pragmatic optimist. And ultimately, I think the reality that we create for ourselves and for our lives, like, comes from what we want to focus on, right? So I could tell you, like, 10 possible dystopian scenarios, but really I'm more interested in spending my time and energy on how can a concrete and pragmatic utopia look like in 10 years, 20 years, and what does that require tomorrow, next week, next month, in terms of like the path to get there. So, I choose to spend my time on that, and I choose to think about that, and I enjoy that. And I do think that, to kind of like talk a little bit more about that in terms of, where can we go to, right? I think that what's happening right now on a very high level, like governments, big corporates, everybody's like, oh my God, sustainability, like regulation, new rules, this and that, like, oh, and then the public as well wants it. So it's not just like that. It's there, and there's a big shakeup that is starting to happen. Like, I really notice it, being like a central node in this global impact and sustainability ecosystem. And so this is good and bad. I mean, it's obviously good because it's about time. The, so to say, bad part is just that I think there's going to be such a rush. It's going to be this sort of like, yeah, but if we are to comply to this regulation, where are we even going to start? If we are to be like other companies that are trying to be net zero, where are we going to start, right? So there's going to be a lot to do on that front. And I think that, and so, and this is good and bad, right? And like, if you look at the good side, like for me, ultimately, it's like, if as many of us as possible, and listener, and and our friends and colleagues, if we can all focus on that, choose to focus on that, and how we can all contribute and find solutions for that, then maybe we have a better chance to move towards utopia.
Nice, fantastic. We're getting to the end of this webinar, and we usually like to ask our guests sources of information, books and podcasts, things that make you tick. It can be about impact investing, or it can be about anything.
So besides the top tier impact newsletter,
Sure.
And the same with Blockchain Mavericks, but I have a couple of podcasts that I really like. They're quite geeky and technology and all of that. But so one of them is called 80,000 Hours. The other one is the podcast of a venture capital firm called Andreessen Horowitz. The podcast is called A16Z. And then there's a few others like Rebel Wisdom, and so a few others where I extract talks. I also tend to, I'm someone where like something comes on my radar, then I'm like, let me go and figure it out, and then I find some talks and so on. So I do use resources also on an ad hoc basis. But these are some of the ones that I enjoy. Oh, and one last thing. Many of you might have seen this new Netflix documentary, Kiss the Ground. And the producer is a friend. He's also a subscriber of the newsletter. You might have seen I gave him a shout out on the last one because a lot of top tier impact members have been talking about it.
I saw
happy. He was really happy to hear that. So I do recommend, Kiss the Ground as a documentary about regenerative agriculture and our soils. It's well done. It's a cool documentary to watch.
Nice. And any books? Any book recommendations?
Any books? That's a whole separate discussion. So, one of my kind of like classics in terms of making recommendations is always Yuval Harari. So Homo Deus is my favorite one out of all of his books. I'm mostly nonfiction. I try to teach myself stuff through books. And so a book, this is very much more on the, leadership front. And I was never one to go and read like these leadership books or whatever, but this is called 15 Commitments for Conscious Leadership. And it's wonderful because it's really like there's so many things coming together. And it was, I was suddenly like, wow, I actually really enjoy going through this. And it's teaching me stuff, not just professionally, but like really like as a person and about life. And so it's really cool. What else can I recommend? Ryan Holiday has some good books also about stoicism. I enjoy his books. Yeah.
Nice. Stoicism remind me of, it's a shame we're running out of time, but a topic you like so much, which is polymathy and people that are polymaths, and Stoics are, it's kind of one of the roots of that, Stoicism. Do you see yourself, final question and then remarks, do you see yourself as a polymath?
I have a talk on YouTube called I think it's like a TED style talk for a conference, the Digital Renaissance Polymaths, right? So the fact that I gave a talk on that might tell you how I see myself. But I've always been quite polymathic. I've always even at school, it was like, yeah, I like maths on one side, but then I love literature for other reasons. And, and then I was told that I had to choose. And I was like, but I don't want to choose. I want to bring it all together. So, yeah. And I believe that the world we're moving into, the polymathic approach is going to become more and more relevant to stay relevant for yourself, right? And for innovation, because innovation is going to be found at the intersection of different topics. And actually, blockchain is a perfect example because it's economics and cryptography meeting, right?
Fantastic. Totally agree. I'm trying to follow that path as well. Alessandra, thank you so much for joining us and having this wonderful conversation. If you want to say some last words, please be my guest. And everyone here, audience, thank you for watching. And please subscribe to our channel and like this video. And Alessandra, final remarks, please.
Yes. No, thank you so much, Gabriel. This was great. Super interesting questions. I would say I would bring it back to something we talked about 10 minutes ago. What you decide to focus on, because it is madness what's happening in pretty much all countries right now and what's unfolding. But at the same time, this is a big opportunity for change. It's a big opportunity for you to also be part of the future. Industries like impact and sustainability. Like I said before, these industries, guys, they're going to need so many smart people. And it's an amazing opportunity because, so this goes both for impact and sustainability and then for obviously the blockchain space, but it's an amazing opportunity for you to be part of that, right? And embed yourself in that and be part of the future, be part of the solutions. And so I would just encourage everybody on focusing on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Alessandra. Obrigado, pessoal. Obrigado a todo mundo. Curtam o vídeo, sigam o canal e um beijo para todos. A gente se vê no próximo Papo de Mercado.
Um beijo. Obrigada.